Hello everybody, it's lcdrU here. So I set up this channel primarily as an informational sort of thing, but those of you who've been watching for a while now will know that I'm pretty interested in LU speedruns and other challenges to make the game harder. So after one short announcement, I'm going to get right in and announce the Hardcore LEGO Universe Challenge. What's the announcement? I do not hear you cry? Well, recently I've been spending a lot of time across random LU servers discussing speedrunning, which sort of felt a little spammy at times, certainly very text-friendly. And so there is now a LEGO Universe Speedrunning Discord, which I will be linking in the description to this video, for all things LEGO Universe Speedrun. If you like these videos or are interested in speedrunning or any of the other challenges, or not even competing and just doing what I do and coming up with new ideas and new ways to play LU, it's a great place to get started. And with that out of the way, on to the meat of today's video, the Hardcore LU Challenge. I've been looking for a while at various challenges that someone could realistically pull off in LU, and although several were pretty much impossible, you can't feasibly play LU without touching the ground, even with exceptions made for missions and quick builds, it turns out. One has stuck with me, Hardcore LU. And what is this Hardcore LU I keep mentioning, and capitalising in the script? It's the following challenge. Get as many achievements, as much mission progression, and use score as you can, playing a specific version of Uchu. Seems easy enough, right? Well, I forgot to mention that you're not allowed to use any items which appear on your character. Only consumables are allowed. Ooh, and you're also not allowed to die. You are allowed to equip items, which allows you to complete one of Epsilon's early missions, but you cannot use them on any game object. Small disclaimer. So in other words, you can't fight things with weapons, but you can sort of swing them around needlessly. Anyway, I've been looking at this challenge for a while now, specifically wondering how far along the quest chain you could make it. It's something of a moot point in Uchu, whose quest chain doesn't extend past the survival mission, and I should note deaths on the survival mission aren't counted as deaths, for the obvious reasons that they're pretty much necessary, in Avant Gardens, but it's an interesting problem nonetheless, and one which will become more and more interesting to answer as more and more progress is made on LU servers. And how far was possible? Well, all of the quest chain up until the survival minigame requires nothing more from you than to smash stromlings and corrupted sentries, which, although Winston's recent update, which is included in this speedrun, to their attacks makes it far harder than it would otherwise have been, it's still possible relatively easily. Honestly, your greatest challenge might be coping with the turret rebuild mission, where the turrets attack you just like the stromlings. But glitches aside, that made me wonder, can we beat the Spider Queen? This is quite an important question for this challenge. Until you beat the Spider Queen, not only can you not leave Avant Gardens, but you can't interact with anything in the picnic area. And without being able to interact with anything in the picnic area, Klaus Z is your only real source of items, but almost everything he sells to you, you can't use. The only things which you can usefully buy from him are Quixicles and Nexus Force healing kits. Once you beat the Spider Queen, stuff begins to become available to you. You get a reliable source of red Imaginite, which means you can reliably use the vending machine, providing you with a way to convert money to crystals for achievements, one of which allows you to buy the Flash Ball, an everlasting consumable that stuns enemies in a nearby radius. It also unlocks a new vendor, and the Returns the Venture Explorer instance, but that pales into comparison with the fact that it lets you reach Nimbus Station. I stopped trying to precisely design a method at this point because there was just so much you could do. Possibly the most useful thing, since Ninjago, Forbidden Valley, and Gnarled Forest have all just become instantly available to you, will be to collect heart flags, since your max health is a strong limiting factor in this speedrun. I've written speedrun in the script, it's not a speedrun, it's a challenge, because you're not timed. You can do it timed if you really wanted to, but there's no defined end to it. It also unlocks many, many more vendors, and in effect the possibilities become pretty much endless from here on in. And so, using only Quixicles and healing kits, can you beat the Spider Queen? Actually, perhaps a more pertinent question would be this: can you even reach the Spider Queen? I mentioned before that mechs and stromlings are pretty easy, but the same is not true of spiderlings, and before you take down the Spider Queen, you've got to get through quite a few of those. Normally, you'd be given trial faction gear with which to achieve this, but you do not have that luxury this time, and so you have to fight your way through the Spider Cave, grinding for postcards with just your bare hands. And here's where things become expensive. You could grind achievements for gem packs in order to get the flash gold, but firstly, I'm pretty certain it doesn't actually stun things in this version of Uchu, and secondly, it would require you to kill enough spiderlings that you'd complete the mission anyway. And since enemies have a certain resistance to stunning, you're not going to be able to get away with stunning the spider queen. However, it turns out that across the 2 servers I've had a chance to reliably work with, it is possible to repeatedly and relatively safely kill spiderlings. Firstly, I'll discuss lcdrU. In the past, I've likened the spider cave in lcdrU to a spider minefield, but why is this? Well, it's because when the player isn't around an area, the player's client unloads objects which aren't important. And whilst most of AG is created using terrain, the spider cave is created entirely with multiple objects. In other words, when you're not around the cave ceases to exist. And without the floor, there's nothing for the spiders to stand on. The server still thinks the spiders are on the surface of the cave, but it also assumes your client knows that too, and so it doesn't feel the need to let it know. However, the reason it assumes your client knows this is that the spiderlings have idling AI, which the server communicates to the player. This is actually the reason why, in most of LU, any areas where enemies are standing directly on top of objects, you will have some sort of weird path you need to walk to get there, which sort of obscures your view of them, because the game needs to update and sort of trigger their idling AI so that they load in the correct place and you just don't see spiderlings suddenly appear popping up through the floor. However, in lcdrU, that AI isn't enabled, meaning that the only way of guaranteeing a game message from the server telling you about a spider is if you get close enough to trigger its AI. It's really difficult to reliably do this and survive because of how close you need to get, and the only AI which you can trigger being the attacking AI. But it becomes easier if you know where you're looking for the spiderling and have quick scores and healing kits on hand to keep you out of its reach and fully healed. Once you've triggered the spiderling, as long as you remain in the area, so will it, and so you can set to work on grinding down its health. In lcdrU, a single spiderling, once visible, takes 4 Nexus Force healing kits to take it down if run perfectly, which, although a perfect run might sound difficult, isn't that hard to achieve in practice. The method is simple. Use Smasher Balls to make sure you begin with at least 4 HP, you could have collected all the heart flags by now for a maximum of 5 HP, then run up to the spider and tank the damage it throws at you whilst attacking 3 times with your fist once you're in range. Then use the healing kit and back off. If you count how many times you've repeated this and the server doesn't lag on you, then your last time you won't need a healing kit because it will be smashed on your last hit. Repeat this to collect all the postcards and you're good. This tactic is pretty decent, and although time consuming, will let you grind down a spiderling's health relatively quickly. However, we should also consider Uchu. On Uchu, the AI will use multiple attacks compared to lcdrU, on which the spiderling will only ever use melee. This is both good and bad. On one hand, its ranged attack means that it can always have gotten a shot off at you by the time you reach it. On the other hand, this means it doesn't always use its more powerful melee as it does in lcdrU. In other words, in some ways it's easier, in some it's harder. And the balance ends up tipping very much in the direction of easier. Turns out, although it's a little less reliable, you can take out, relatively safely, one spiderling with 1 healing kit, as long as you dodge its attacks as you run up. The method's simple. Run up, dodge attacks, and once you're there, swing until you're low on health, including taking the hit on the run up. This came to 6 swings for me. Then use a healing kit to get your health back up and keep attacking. There are 9 hits remaining, and since once you've smashed it you don't need to worry about getting damaged or running away, this should be manageable and you can survive. So it definitely seems possible, and this will be enough for me to posit this as being a possible technique, but there's one very important thing we've left out: movement AI. Looking at AI led me to go back to some of the original in-game footage just to see what things were like. And although there's movement AI, the actual attack AI seems to be easier to beat. Dodging, for instance, is far easier because physics is enabled on the server, meaning it will definitely be possible for a minifigure on 4 health and with a nice couple of healing kits to make it to the heart flag. Shouldn't even really need a health kit, which is nice to check. But the real question is, do the differences between Uchu or lcdrU's AI and Live's AI mean that the two are somehow incomparable? The answer, fortunately, was no. I expected I'd see quite a large difference between the two, given the fact that one of them could pathfind and the other two couldn't, but honestly it wasn't as large as I thought. If you'd aggroed multiple spiderlings at once, then they'd converge on you, but honestly, since they didn't walk around much on their own, or even when aggroed, you'd look to be pretty safe. You'd have to intentionally aggro multiple of them at once. They never really seem to move far or fast enough to bring you within range of their melee attacks. And so, looking at all this stuff, whilst it'd be hard to compare Uchu and Live directly, I'd say their difficulty levels are relatively similar. Both, however, are much easier than on lcdrU for all the reasons outlined above. But regardless, the conclusion is yes, you can manage to safely attack spiderlings as long as you're well prepared in any of the servers. And that's a good start, but it doesn't solve anything for us. We still have to beat the spider queen. It should be noted that, at this stage, we're more discussing the possibility of running this challenge in a completed server. lcdrU does have the Spider Queen and quest up to it, but it's missing all but one melee attack, which leads to an interesting exploit I'll discuss later. And since lcdrU isn't public, it wouldn't be a fair or fun challenge to discuss anyway. Also, Uchu's quest chain does not progress this far. However, spawning the Spider Queen into Uchu can still be instructive and can help us understand what we're up against. And so, before we get onto the Spider Queen and her attacks, I'd like to quickly mention the spiderling she spawns. For those unfamiliar with the Spider Queen, her boss fight was split into 3 rounds. First wave, she'd use only 3 attacks, a simple ranged attack and 2 melee attacks. And each round would get an extra ranged attack, although we'll go into more detail on those in a second, since here I'm more interested in what happens between each round. And the answer to this is that the Spider Queen jumps up to the mountain pine block yard and spawns spiderlings. I wanted to say 2 from memory of lcdrU, but I could be wrong. Actually, a note from afterwards that I now looked at a lot of footage whilst doing this and I was correct. To fight. Because I've now extended that clause so far, you have no idea what to fight refers to, but yeah. I'm discussing fighting something, so it's probably relevant. The reason this is interesting is that these have less health than the ones we've fought earlier. So in theory at least, this section of the boss fight could be easier. The difference, however, which would make this more challenging, is that both will attack and run at the player at once. However, given the ability to return to the safe spot by the rocket, to which the spiderlings cannot pathfind, or just your ability to run around the spiderlings, surviving this should still be achievable. One point to note is that, unlike with Uchu, analysis of live footage showed that the Spider Queen also wouldn't attack players up by the rocket, so this will provide players with a nice way to regen some health safely. So far, so good. The question now is, what are her attacks like? The LEGO Universe Wiki is slightly incorrect in its description of her attacks, certainly by the footage I looked at, so I'll go through them here, although using the Wiki's names where possible. These first attacks are all found in the first round. Fireball shoots a single damage homing projectile at the player. Ground Pound rears up to deal damage and knock them down. Web Shot shoots web which deals damage to players. The second round adds the Waves of Fire attack. Well, he claims the fireballs are homing, which makes this sound really scary because she also throws loads out, but they aren't, meaning unless you're really unlucky, you're probably only ever going to get hit by a single one. And while she's firing the rest, you can just escape. Finally, the third round adds the Rain of Fire attack, where projectiles rain from above. In theory, this could be a problem, but since a target literally shows up on the ground warning players before the impact, they can be avoided relatively easily. However, there is the risk of some degree of damage chaining occurring here, with each projectile hitting you into others whilst you're out of control, and if you fail to dodge one of them, this could be dangerous. In other words, the last 2 attacks seem survivable as long as you're relatively careful. So what about the first set? Well, the Fireball attack is activated when players are beyond a certain distance, and it's pretty easy to dodge as long as you keep moving, so you should be safe to just run in circles around the Spider Queen in order to regen health and remain pretty much fine. It also only fires every so often, telling you exactly when the best time is to move into close quarters without being hit by it. The Ground Pound is really easy to avoid, you just need to run away when she rears up and you'll be perfectly safe, you've got lots of time to get out of the way. Web Shot is the only remaining attack, and it is a relatively dangerous melee attack. If anything's going to lead to your death, this is probably it, but there is a remaining feature to note about this attack, which may help to keep you safe. When playing on lcdrU, in which this is the only attack enabled, I noticed a small sweet spot in which you could hit the Spider Queen and she couldn't attack you. Obviously, in ordinary gameplay, she'd have other attacks to use, but this ability to stand in precisely the right spot. This isn't perfect, since attacking as the player moves you forward slightly, meaning you need to carefully maintain your position by slowly pressing the back arrow key, but it is quite an interesting approach, which is well worth noting. But, I hear you cry, we're not running this on lcdrU, and we can't run this on Uchu. We'll only be able to do this once a public server completely implements all this, and none has. And you'd be correct, they haven't. However, one of the things that's been interesting to note is that lcdrU typically makes hard mobs harder. Why? Well, because they can only use a single melee attack, which is typically their most powerful one, and so they're not going to be split between using their more powerful and their weaker attacks. In other words, whilst we need to consider ranged attacks, and especially in the case of the Spider Queen's huge variety of them, tricks which help us in lcdrU are definitely worth noting. And so we move to Uchu. We either teleport ourselves to Blockyard using commands, or we spawn her somewhere random. What do we find? Well, as predicted, if we get too close, she can deal large amounts of damage, and if we stay further away, we'll only feel her fireball attack, which can be easily dodged. It's not completely clear-cut as to what attack she's actually using, because the animations don't play properly, or at least haven't in my experience, but it's clear that if you get close and remain close, she begins to deal more significant damage, and the rate of damage feels to me as though it speeds up somewhat. So, how to counter this? I found that it's typically pretty much safe to do the following. Number 1, run up. Number 2, deal 3 damage, preferably from within the sweet spot, so you're relatively safe. 3, back up and heal from the surrounding smashables. And here's the interesting part, if you do this, you'll find you have health remaining, and will think that it might be more efficient to remain in close and fight her for a little longer before backing up. That's what I thought, and maybe I'm wrong in just messing this up somehow, but I couldn't manage to reliably make this work. Once I got in close for an extended period, she'd almost always do enough damage to kill me. It was also much harder to judge the sweet spot, so perhaps I was just straying too close, but that's sort of the point of all this. If I had all the answers, why bother? This is a proof of concept showing this is possible. My challenge is for you to go out and find better ways of doing this than I've done. And so, with that, as long as you're constantly being alert and careful, it should definitely be possible to make it up to and past the Spider Queen without being smashed once, using only your bare hands, some consumables, and some patience. And that brings us to the end of today's video. I find thinking about these things and investigating them really interesting, and if you do too, then again I'm going to shamelessly plug you the server, because you're exactly the sort of person it will be amazing to have on there, so check the description. And with that said, if you're new to the channel, subscribe to the developer channels in the description. Without them, nothing here would be possible. I've been lcdrU, thank you for listening, and I will see you around.